人有5名，代价有3个。竟然，你不是其中之一。
Knockback has been consistently viewed as mediocre by the community since the dawn of time. It's an immutable law of the universe, akin to Newton's laws of physics if you think about it. But after thinking about it some more and then writing this video, I think that knockback is a really cool ability in general that deserves more attention. Because you need to actually think about how you use it, much more than you would for a conventional CC like freeze, slow, or even weaken. Which is also why most people don't really gravitate towards it. To start, the knockback ability, well, it knocks the enemy back, duh. But there are actually 3 kinds of knockback induced by different sources, each one knocking back a different distance and with different durations. I couldn't find external sources that reliably documented this, so I tested it myself and analyzed it frame by frame, so feel free to dispute if you find otherwise. The first is the one induced by the knockback ability. It knocks the enemy back by 165 range and lasts for 10 frames. This is also increased by 10% per fruit treasure up to 214.5 range, and can also be further boosted with combos if you want. The Breaker Blast cannon also inflicts this. The other 2 aren't caused by the knockback ability, but I'm gonna talk about them anyway because I want to and you cannot stop me. The second is induced by damage. Every unit and enemy will be knocked back after taking a percentage of their health as damage, indicated by their knockback count. This takes priority over the other 2 types if they happen on the same attack. This knocks the enemy back by 345 range and lasts for 25 frames. The third is induced by 3 very specific sources: Sniper the power-up, Default Cat Cannon, and Holy Blast, but only for zombies. This is what I like to refer to as flinching, for reasons that you're probably aware of, since it only knocks the enemy back by 55 range while still lasting for 10 frames. Note that knockback immunity only applies to the one induced specifically by the ability, meaning that Sniper the power-up, Cat Cannon, Holy Blast, and obviously damage knockback will still work on enemies that have knockback immunity. Though note that Cat Cannon is a wave attack and can only hit and hence flinch enemies without wave immunity. The property that you're most likely familiar with is that when an enemy is interrupted during their force swing, they have to restart their animation, while if you knock them back during their backswing, they get to skip their backswing entirely and start burning through their idle time. This can be weaponized on either end of the animation on either side of the battlefield. You're first taught about this in Empire of Cats Chapter 2, where you fight Nyandom and his extremely long force swing, which gives you plenty of time to knock it back via damage, via ability with Bean Cat or Pirate Cat or something, or more likely, timing your Cat Cannon. This is also why I and many others refer to that form of knockback as flinching, since the actual distance isn't actually that great, so it's primarily used for interrupting enemy attacks. On the other side of the animation, some enemies have their TBA made of almost entirely backswing animation and little to no idle time. Enemies like Brollo variants, Dolphina variants, Puffington variants, Kurokroc, just to name a few. For these enemies, if you were to knock them back, they'll immediately rebound back and attack again, and hence why units and enemies that have TBA made up of almost entirely backswing is commonly known as Rebound. Knocking these enemies back is a death sentence. You do not want to give these enemies more attacks. Similarly, on the unit side, there are rebound units too, and you're probably familiar with them by now, like Bahamut, Edie, Yukimura, Street Fighter Sonic, actual Sonic, Isumboshi, etc., etc. The most prominent example of knockback with regard to interfering with animations is your first rematch with God in Cats of the Cosmos Chapter 2, where you can abuse knockback on both forward swing and backswing to Bahamut chain God into oblivion. Basically, Bahamut will first land a hit on God, then get knocked back by God and rebound, attack again, repeat 2 more times thanks to God's multi-hits, and combined with a bit of support from more rushers like Maglev, they do enough damage to knock back God, interrupting his animation and forcing him to restart his animation before he can land his actual damaging strike. Knockback will happen regardless of whether either side brings knockback units, since damage knockback will always be there, so you will always have to deal with it or can always make use of it, depending on how you look at it. Another big property relating to knockback is that for the duration of the knockback, the entity's hitbox completely disappears. This invulnerability, plus getting that entity knocked back behind other supporting entities to protect them. And also the other side then needs to spend more time walking up, so it generally makes the entity live even longer. This is why units like Mitama and Shishilan and enemies like Rain D variants feel like they are absolutely immortal, even if their health pools aren't actually that high. Which is another reason why people don't really like to use knockback as their go-to CC. On top of this, when knocking an enemy back, your units can actually die as well, with 2 main possibilities, which are from speed clipping and Misley syndrome. Speed clipping is a topic I want to talk about more in depth in its own video, but the relevant part is that for the duration of the knockback, the hitbox completely disappears. So units will not detect any enemy within their range and move forward, which is especially apparent with fast units. This can lead to those units dying, or worse, triggering an Omni Strike that kills everything else too. As for Misley syndrome, it is very old by this point. It is so old that the poster child of the syndrome doesn't even cause it anymore. But anyway, Misley syndrome is caused when you knock enemy frontliners back into backliner range, by ability or by damage, so your units will now push into the enemy backliner range and all get killed by the enemy backliner as a result. But this is not a big deal if you actually, use your brain and play around it by simply either not using knockback units in the first place, or using nukers that can 1-2 shot the enemy without excessively knocking it back, or just having a knockback unit that can also knock the backline back as well. And if it can't be avoided, you can just use disposable units like Can, Slime, or Courier, who all have excellent mobility and don't necessitate stacking, so even if your units do die, you're still fine. You do have to take note of this when using knockback on stages with powerful backliners, but it's not a deal breaker for using knockback on these stages. And in fact, there are ways to actively take advantage of both of these, mostly thanks to rushers. First, you can intentionally speed clip rushers without Pierce to artificially give them Pierce, or rushers like Yukimura and Edie who don't have any Pierce. You could try to time them to actively clip into the enemy's hitbox, and potentially hit enemies slightly behind them, at the risk of further endangering their survivability and being really difficult to time. Note that for Bahamut specifically, he has a 5-frame forward swing, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually gives a lot of enemies enough time to hit him back. Usually Awakened Bahamut relies on his range, but with speed clipping, you're giving up that advantage, so take note. And for rushers that do have Pierce, including ones you artificially give Pierce this way, their Pierce is generally limited, like usually only about 100 range or so. And this is where Misley Syndrome can be used to your advantage. By knocking frontliners close to backliner range, you can now hit them both with a piercing rusher and do big damage, or also artificially create pierce to hit them both anyway. I'm not saying this is easy to do because it isn't, but the point is that you can turn these weaknesses into strengths by playing around them. Knockback is also by far the most volatile of the 5 CCs. If you think about the other 4 CCs, there isn't really a common situation where having them alone is bad. Contrast this with Knockback, where I have just spent the last 2 paragraphs describing its drawbacks, where it can actively make the situation worse. There are also very few non-Uber guaranteed knockback units, and there are also really no general use guaranteed knockback units at all, like Bomber or something. The only non-Ubers with guaranteed knockback are either single target, in the case of Crystal, Tourist, and Deadeye, really niche in the case of God, or incredibly late game like Doron Trueform and Gigando. Plus, people generally don't keep track of how many hits to a damage knockback in most stages, which makes it feel more random, and creates this feeling that knockback is unreliable and unpredictable. These factors combine to form a perception that knockback is unreliable and hard to predict, which is not unfounded, especially with knockback procs, but there are ways of creating knockback with reliability. First is the Cat Cannon and Breaker Blast. They can both knock the enemy back, Cat Cannon by flinching and Breaker Blast by ability knockback. These come out relatively quickly, especially Breaker Blast, which can be timed very precisely to capitalize on the strengths I'll get to in a bit and mitigate its weaknesses. And also, since it actually knocks the enemy back by a significant distance and comes out basically instantly. Additionally, rushers like Bahamut can actually act as knockback units too. By just dealing a comedically obscene amount of damage, they can effectively create knockback when you need it. And these rushers also tend to be the greatest beneficiaries from knockback. Speaking of which, Rebound rushers also have a really interesting dynamic with knockback. On top of Rebound itself synergizing with knockback caused by enemies, it also synergizes immensely with knockback induced by units, through chaining. Have you ever heard of the phrase, the best defense is a good offense? Well, that's especially true in the Battle Cats. Well, naturally, the enemies can't kill you if they're dead, but especially because in the Battle Cats, every enemy will be knocked back after taking a certain amount of damage. And when that happens, the enemy loses progress on any current attack, obviously cannot restart attacking during those 25 frames, then the enemy has to walk back up again, clearing out any defensive units that walk up during those 25 frames, all just to hit that same rebound unit again while it sits there without moving forward, since that's backswing and not idle time. Generally speaking, this can buy enough time for most rebound rushers to finish their backswing, and allows them to get even more attacks off without losing health. Which is especially valuable since rebound rushers are often balanced around getting a very limited number of attacks in before dying. So any ways to extend their lifespan means more hits means more damage, which is incredibly useful for getting the most bang for your Bahamut. Especially since Breaker Blast is an excellent general use cannon, and so you can always have a baseline level of support for chaining. In fact, other than Rebound, Knockback is also tremendously synergistic in general, including with other CCs. There is a logical explanation for this. I'll bar curse for this analysis since it's really situational and generally anomalous. See, if you combine any 2 of the other 3 CCs, you don't get much. The best is Weaken plus Slow, but it's not a great combination and you rarely see them being paired on a single unit, and especially with freeze, since that basically negates all other CC for its duration. Since they obviously can't attack during that duration, which negates the effect of weaken and curse, and they also can't move, which negates slow. Knockback, on the other hand, pairs excellent with all three. The reason for this requires a bit of analysis. See, Knockback is unique among the 5 CCs in being the only reactive CC of the 5. If you look at the other 4, they are all aimed at trying to prevent the enemies from pushing in the first place. On the other hand, Knockback is a way to undo the pushing that the enemy has already done. Stacking proactive CC doesn't really do much, since the enemy's pushing power is generally already very low when afflicted with a single one, again barring curse. So stacking a second one doesn't really do that much. On the other hand, pairing one of these with Knockback makes for an excellent synergy, since they serve to cover each other's bases, in both undoing the enemy's pushing progress and also preventing them from easily redoing said progress. This is why Knockback can be incredibly powerful when used in tandem with other CC, and serves a uniquely synergistic role within the 5 CCs. Other than Rebound and other CCs, Knockback also has a two-way synergy with LD. Remember earlier when I said that Knockback can cause attacks to miss? Well, for most LD units, once they start their attack, even after the unit is knocked back, they will likely still be within the piercing range and still get hit. As long as the attack itself doesn't occur during the 10 or 25 frames of invulnerability. On the other end of the synergy, Knockback can also knock an enemy out of a unit's blind spot to be hit. This is most prominent with Breaker Blast, since it can be precisely timed. I don't expect this statement to be that relatable, but even just watching footage of Kyosaka Nanaho against metals should make the point abundantly clear. Nanaho is an anti-metal with huge crits and LD, insanely powerful. But for an anti-metal, she has a pretty big blind spot. In fact, her blind spot can contain every single non-gimmick metal enemy. Her inner range is also only 100, means enemies only have to push through 100 range to get into her blind spot. So you'll need a bunch of other CC and defense to keep them from entering the blind spot. Or you could just use Knockback. If you time your Breaker Blast cannon to be just before Nanaho lands her attack, which is pretty easy to do, you can easily push the enemies straight into her huge crit, assuming you win the coin flip. Obviously, Nanaho is an extreme case, which is why I used her to illustrate the point, and is obviously a legend rare and hence not relatable to all players, but there are other cases too. This can apply to most general LD units with pretty big blind spots. I just personally use this with Nanaho a lot. Alternatively, for multi-hits that hit different areas, such as with Nala, you can time Breaker Blast or just damage knockback an enemy during or right after the first hit to be hit by the second or third hit. This is obviously much rarer, but it is a thing you can do, and maybe you should consider doing it. The fourth thing that Knockback has a big synergy with is with the holy trinity of Wave, Surge, and Explosion. All 5 CCs are elevated by this, but Knockback has by far the best synergy here. For Wave and Explosion, the other 4 CCs just get their duration extended by about less than a second, depending on the distance from the target. Generally, it's not that much, but with Knockback, the proc is almost always doubled. For Surge, again, the proc duration is increased substantially, about half a second at level 1 to about 2 seconds at level 3. But this is assuming that all the surges hit, and considering that the surge itself may miss, or the enemy may be knocked out of the surge by damage. So what about Knockback? Well, knockback ability, unlike damage knockbacks, only lasts for 10 frames and only knocks back by 165 range. So most enemies can walk straight back into the surge and get knocked back again, which effectively creates an impossible barrier that your units can slowly walk up to. And since knockback is a reactive CC whose biggest flaw in terms of CC is needing some way to keep the enemy back there, extending the duration like this does just that, serving as a uniquely powerful proactive and reactive CC. Additionally, if the surge spawn location is even further back, the unit carrying this ability can knock the enemy into the surge with the main attack. This is perfectly epitomized by Castley the Scourge, whose LD attack can create a level 2 surge to knock the enemy back 3 times in a single attack, creating immense pushing power and perfectly showcasing the strength of knockback when used with surge. But other than Castley, a few other Ubers showcase this too, like Bomber and Misley Ultra forms, and most recently, as of writing this, Lunos the Luminous. Double knockback is immensely powerful, and I still think it is extremely underrated. So you remember how I was talking about Bahamut chaining earlier? About how knockback can help get Bahamut out of Eulala's range? Well, you can do this with your base too. Base tanking can be a pretty good strategy, but you have to ensure that your base doesn't actually die. And due to how non-LD units interact with bases, if you knock back a non-LD enemy and you can be sure that it didn't move, you can then be absolutely sure that for their next attack, they will not hit your base. This is important for enemies like Dabu, who has a massive Omni-Strike and immunities that make it difficult to stop. So flinching is really the only way to slow his advance over time, and importantly to prevent him from killing your base. It's also useful for zombie stages in general. Since zombies will always unburrow on your base, you can use it to force certain zombies to resurface when you need it to. But in doing so, especially for stronger zombies like Zerzeal and God forbid Cadaver Bear, you risk actually dying. And where knockback comes in is that you can force the zombie off of your base, preventing it from actually being destroyed. Holy Blast does exist for this, but sometimes it might not be up. So this could be a good secondary strategy to use with units like Ectowig or Talented Hypermister. Alright, that's about all. I really like this ability because of its sheer strategic depth, compared to something like Freeze or Slow. Knockback is a lot more interesting, and if you've watched up till this point, then you probably get why. I literally did just spend the last 12 paragraphs or so elaborating on all the nuances I could think of. Most of this is highly theatrical, and their actual applications can be very niche, but they do exist, and maybe that will help you when strategizing. But yeah, that's about all, I think. If there's anything I missed out on, let me know in the comments, we can discuss it there. I really want to make science out of this game, in case you can't tell, and have been trying to do so over the past year I've been making these videos. So in any case, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, don't die.